Well, I'd like to welcome Alex Zaharakis to the ResilientBiome podcast today. Alex, I know you have very limited time and you're able to squeeze this in, so I really appreciate it. I'm going to read your bio, Alex, so people have an idea of where we're starting here. Alex is a licensed and board certified medical physicist in radiation oncology. He's a scientist with background in physics, mathematics, and biology that has utilized his life experiences to develop an analytical method for quantifying and intervening with intestinal dysbiosis, which he believes to be significant in the development and severity of autism and other disease states. This is why the title of the podcast today is Improving Autism Symptoms by Healing the Gut. So I am really excited about what we're going to talk about here today, Alex. But first, I've got a quick question. I see that medical physicist, and you also studied physics, but they're not the same thing, are they?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. Probably most physicists or people that go to school for physics, I don't even think that they would have heard of medical physics. Certainly, I didn't. I was in academia teaching college physics and engineering for a couple of years, and it just happened to be that one of the universities that I was adjuncting at, they were starting this medical physics program in the evening. I never even heard of it. And basically, there's medical uses for radiation, either therapeutic or diagnostic. And it piqued my interest because, I was always interested in some kind of applied science, but I never really found kind of my niche of how to apply kind of my background. And so I went to school in the evenings to kind of pursue that, and had to go through a residency and all these board certifications. But and in the end, it paid off because I found myself getting more interested in the biological components that were kind of tied in there with physics. And I don't think that I would have been introduced to that otherwise. And uh, some of that kind of gave way to a little bit of what I'm doing now in terms of the understanding of the biology and the mechanism. So, yeah, it's really interesting. There's not many medical physicists. There's usually, if you find a hospital, maybe there's one or two per hospital, or if it's a bigger hospital, maybe there's three or four. But typically we work in either oncology or some kind of diagnostics.
So do you work directly with cancer patients then?
Yeah, patients that receive a radiation therapy treatment, the medical physicist is involved in either the development of their treatment plan or the quality assurance of their treatment plan. And all of to these days, there's so much computer involvement, so there's a lot of kind of calculations involved, and making sure everything that is intended to go right goes right. So yeah, there's different types of therapies that you can kind of utilize radiation, and a lot of patients will. It's an adjuvant, so it's not that the radiation is going to turn their cancer around, but it can shrink very big masses effectively, and they're usually on other different types of therapies that kind of boost the immune system. So I think they recognize that there's no one thing that could solve the problem, but it's a tool that certainly can help you know uh, better that disease state.
Yeah, fascinating, a challenging field for sure to work in. I love the fact that your day job, you're helping people all day long. And now in this extra thing in autism and gut microbiome, you are also seeking to help people all the time. So you're putting all this together. That's wonderful. I'm just going to mention for most people that would listen to a podcast that has either microbiome or autism in, probably already know that autism, when we'll probably be talking about ASD, autism spectrum disorder, same thing as autism. So using those interchangeably. Well, Alex, you're way ahead of me in the gut health arena. I still consider myself an absolute newbie. But one of the things I've noticed is that breakthroughs and great ideas seem to come out of personal stories of somebody who was sick and then had some degree of healing. So how did your story bring you to helping now? It's been hundreds of families with their gut issues and their disease states.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I really do think that a lot of these uh, connections are made by um, kind of situations or individuals where there's some kind of skin in the game, where there was some life event that kind of rocks the boat, takes you back, and it forces you to get involved on a personal level. For me, it was my son. He regressed around 17 months, and there was a multitude of factors that were a contribution to that. It probably, some of the initial, and when you say regress, it's to someone else, it's probably pretty foreign, but it's a very quick change in symptoms and kind of you know the kind of their behaviors, so to speak. And very early on, there was a perception that there was something related to food, because you would see kind of a vast difference in him when he would eat something, and he would have either skin reactions, or would kind of make him a little bonkers. And obviously, there was variations in his bowel movements, very loose and kind of smelly, and just things didn't look right. So there were some inferences there that there was something going on with food. And but one of the most, and certainly we got to a point where we started to do some testing. And obviously I realized I had to kind of make myself the center of learning to figure out what was going on with him, because we had gone to so many different doctors and practitioners. And even in the hospital that I was working at, you almost felt like the things that you were saying were either not being believed, or eventually kind of took it in the light of, this is too complicated of a problem for most people to understand or intervene. So you get the common response, hey, do you think I'm helping you out? Or if not, maybe you want to see someone else. So that's kind of a lot of what parents will experience, particularly in the Western area of medicine. But one of the things that stood out for me is that the my son's behaviors, or the issues that he was having, either with his tummy or his bowel movements, there was always a variation over the day, which to me, it didn't make sense as a scientist and kind of someone that's analytical, right? If I think that if I have some kind of state, I would assume it to be kind of static, like you feel crummy all the time, or I do this thing, and it's because there's something that happened that we don't quite understand. But it would seem that there would be these cyclical periods throughout the day where he would do these things and he wouldn't do these things, and he would do these things and he wouldn't do these things. And I was able to correlate them to his bowel movements. It was very quite striking. He would have particularly this little app that he would play, where he would do this matching, and he was really good at it, like match the triangle to the triangle and so on and so forth. But I would find that there would be times when playing this app where he would get the answers completely wrong. It just didn't make any sense to me. And one day it dawned on me, he's sitting on my lap, and he would also have this very unexplained symptom where you would kind of touch his head at certain times, and it would almost feel like he had a fever. It was like really warm, and I told the doctors, they've even witnessed it. His therapist had witnessed it, and they're like, yeah, he feels like he has a fever now. And, an hour later he doesn't. So he was sitting on my lap at this one moment. He's playing this app. He's playing it, and I'm watching him progressively match these things wrong, like more and more wrong. And then I smell that he's going to have a bowel movement because he passes some gas. His head is on my cheek, and I feel like someone took a flamethrower and put it on my cheek. And there and behold, he has a bowel movement. He's doing the game wrong. He's having this fever, and it made the connection in my head. This is definitely explaining the cyclicity of what's going on with him. So then it was a hunt of basically, I'm going to figure this thing out the best that I can. And I just, it was almost haunting. I would stay up hours at night reading everything that I could, doing tests on him, stool tests, sometimes 3 and 4 in the same day to test reproducibility, but kind of what was going on. So there was a lot of connections that I was able to make. There was a lot of people that I was able to reach out to, and then to kind of infer other connections. But that's basically how I got into it, and that's what drives me, because I think that there's so much in this area that not only represents autism and what you can do to intervene there, but other disease states, even in cancer, and there's a ton of literature to show that. I think if you want to try to stay away from not having a cancer in your life, one of the best things you can do is make sure that your immune system is working well. And one way to access that is by making sure that your microbiome is kind of in a good state.
Yeah, amazing facts there. The set of unusual symptoms, I can imagine a lot of parents would never have put those pieces together.
Yeah, I think one of the ways to do that, and this even goes, you can even apply this logic to someone that doesn't have autism, is that if you have a particular symptom or an issue, and let's say that you kind of uncover through the microbiome testing that, hey, there's this particular herb or probiotic could theoretically intervene with that. And if you take that and then you see that that symptom starts to worsen initially, that kind of reaction and reactivity, even though it's not ideal, can almost be in a kind of representation that you're kind of going in the right direction. And it's also represented, you can see that correlation very clearly. For instance, one of the symptoms that the kids tend to do, there's a lot of them. They have these episodes of kind of inebriated laughter, or they might do this tiptoe kind of walking thing at an early age. You might find that if you intervene with an herb, it actually gets worse initially, but then in the downfall, kind of in the fall off after that, you find that the baseline gets less. The mechanisms to understand that are very complicated, and my understanding of it is still kind of limited, but certainly you can see that there's a relationship between symptoms, that you can mitigate them slowly over time, but you can also kind of exacerbate them. And then there's this component of what's released during that period when you're exacerbating them, or kind of hitting the bee's nest is one of the terms that I like to use.
So at some point the pieces came together and collectively able to determine that this is probably autism.
Yeah, it's a lot more, it's hard to kind of bucket it into a word like that to broad it, because the problem with the word autism is that it has such a broad definition. What I like to do to really make sure that I'm talking to the right population is I say moderate to severe autism. So this is autism that impacts significantly the quality of life. It could be through motor coordination, it could be through inability to communicate, or to what appears to understand, difficulties with walking, or kind of being able to potty train, or just reactivities, aggressiveness. Unfortunately, the word is so broad, and the diagnosis of it, it's such a conflicted environment, because you're told on one hand there's no medical component of it, but then on other hands you're told that there is a medical component of it. In some states, the diagnosis criteria is different depending on whether you're talking to the doctor or the school. For instance, we moved here to Arizona a couple of years ago. My son was I think 5 then. He'd already been diagnosed for 3 years. I mean, it's unequivocal that he had diagnosis, but we had to prove to the state that he was autistic by having him in a school for a year, and have someone looking at him despite having, multiple professionals kind of diagnosis with autism. On the other hand, you can go to a psychologist and pay them thousands of dollars for a diagnosis. And the impetus for doing that would be, it would kind of expose you to certain therapies that might help you out. So the word itself, is there's so many things tied into it, unfortunately. But I would say, yes, you can, if you're in the realm of severe, moderate to severe autism, and that usually implicates this, inabilities to communicate, motor coordination, things like that, intolerances. You can certainly intervene, and there's a lot of evidence to show that by gaming the gut, you can mitigate a lot of these symptoms quite significantly.
No, that's wonderful. So you're able to identify that, you were able to help your son, and then you thought, I could be able to help others as well. That's how this has come about.
Yeah, yeah, and even in that moment of kind of helping others, my grandiose vision was, what better way to kind of support the theories that I had is that if I know things work for him and I reach out to other people who were willing to kind of look at this information and try this, and if it worked on them, well, now I have a lot of evidence that if in 100 people this symptom of kind of kind of uncontrollable giddy laughter is a feature of having too much ammonia in the body, and we have tools that can reduce that, and then in all of those people the symptom comes down to near zero, what better way to kind of validate that? So my kind of idea is that in larger numbers I could kind of attack the problem, get the feedback, kind of work the model, improve it, and then along the ride, hopefully correlate with some great people that or collaborate with some great people, physicians. One of them, the physicians I work with, Dr. Christian Bogner, has the same kind of mindset. Is we share information, right? We want to, if we find something that works, we kind of want to test that out. Obviously in a safe way, but the life is too short to not want to share healing, right? That there shouldn't be a price for being healthy. If something bad happens to you in your life, it shouldn't be, you have to kind of discover, all of these hidden secrets to kind of get back to a healthy state. So I think that's one of the things that drives me even today, is that there's more to learn, there's more to figure out. Every year we keep on kind of pinning down a couple more things, and it's just so exciting. Kind of gives you, a purpose almost.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I would have to say your son is lucky to have you as his dad. He's got the right dad, and I know how important moms are. So moms at least are more important in completely different ways, maybe some similar ways. So that's an unfortunate story, but also a powerful story. So thank you for that, Alex. We mentioned your full-time job as a medical physicist, and because an outgrowth of helping people, you've actually started 2 companies with some supplements. And I'm wondering, how in the world do you manage all of these things?
Yeah, it's really, you have to be super efficient, and it's very, I'll be honest with you, it is stressful and things are very time consuming, but it's also exciting, and the more that we push forward, things have only kind of gone in the right direction. So we started 2 companies this year, and the impetus for that was, one, we discovered a compound that's been really helpful in kind of supporting glutathione, and we found that it paired well with working on this microbiome tool analysis that I was doing. We believe that there is an intimate connection between and obviously this is nothing shocking, detoxification in general and the status of the microbiome. If you happen to acquire some kind of toxicity, it's chemical or metals or exposure to something, there's only 3 ways that you evacuate that. You either poop it out, you pee it out, or you sweat it out. So pooping it out, that's a primary mode. You do that every day. It's a big orifice, and by doing that, that toxicity that you're drawing out, just as if you were like moving out of a house, right? The walls get scuffed up. You got to paint and spackle them. The microbiome gets damaged over time. So there's this intimate connection between kind of shifting the microbiome and taking advantage of, the metabolites and things that get produced, the short chain fatty acid, but also keeping it, oiled and running to deal with the burdens that are coming in from the outside, but maybe coming out from the inside. We felt the need that we had to kind of start the second company that had these supplements, because one of the biggest issues with this gut balancing that I was doing is that my motto is I wanted to make it feasible and practical, and it necessitates taking maybe 10 or 15 or sometimes even 20 different components in this kind of 6-week program, not necessarily every day, but at some frequency, maybe once or twice, 3 times a week. So to the person or the parent coming in that doesn't really have any experience with this, is very jarring. That was certainly an issue. The second issue was this palatability. How do you get a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old to take, something like pomegranate peel or olive leaf, that isn't the worst tasting thing, but it's not ideal. And certainly
it's not chocolate.
Yeah, it's not chocolate. And these kids particularly are picky eaters to begin with. So we struck out a lot. We went to different companies. I had formulas in mind for a long time. We were talking about making a supplement. And we just happened to get connected with the right manufacturing company. Same kind of story. It was a leader that had some healing issues of his own very early on, and he happened to become very successful, and he had this manufacturing company, and his motto is everything clean, like the cleanest of everything that you could possibly do. That's the way they delivered their compounds. So we gave them a formula and they said, yeah, we could do it. Not only can we do it, we could make it taste good without having to add sugar or anything bad. They have this proprietary technology where they use the rinds of fruits that they can offset the bitterness in the compounds. I mean, it's not like eating candy, but it certainly cuts it down significantly. So now all of a sudden we had a solution for working with these kids. We could make it more simpler by making these products, kind of compartmentalizing several of them in one, and make it taste palatable. And also bringing down the price, essentially, because to parse these things out, these 52 ingredients in one supplement, it would be much more expensive. So that was always the impetus. I wanted and it actually started from one of the practitioners that was using my model, Dr. Julie Logan. She had mentioned to me, would it be nice to have a supplement that has all this stuff in there so that, it would be so much easier for the kids. And ever since she said that to me, I was like, yeah, that would be a great idea. So we made it happen, and we've been kind of driving the formulas forward. We want to make the intervention feasible and practical, and that's what we want to do, and we want to make it attainable, right?
Yeah, I can see that Crane Company is just driven by helping people. You mentioned the glutathione angle. Is that your ointment?
Yeah, so we have a lotion that has a compound in it that helps to recycle oxidized glutathione. There's a lot of buzz around glutathione, and probably many of the parents dealing with their kids on the spectrum have kind of noticed that it either works or kind of it doesn't. And what we've been able to make some connections is that we think that a significant part of the problem is not taking glutathione, right? You take glutathione, and when you use it in its reduced form, it gets spent. But then the molecule gets left over, kind of like an empty candy wrapper. It becomes reduced, it becomes oxidized glutathione. If you keep on taking glutathione, you use it, you get all these wrappers. Eventually, you're in a room with 1,000 candy wrappers. If no one takes away the wrappers, those wrappers actually impact other areas of methylation. In the Krebs cycle, there's this SAMe pathway, and that oxidized glutathione can inhibit it, and then it starts to stall other processes. So this compound actually helps you convert that oxidized glutathione back to a reduced state. So it's kind of like recycling it, using those, putting the candy back in the wrapper. And we think that it's really helpful. Obviously, people have said kind of positive things about it. It's a lotion, it's topical, and we think paired with the microbiome intervention, it really kind of allows you to tackle the problem from two ends.
So the topical application, is that better or easier than taking it orally?
Problem with taking it orally is that it can degrade somewhat in the stomach acid. The other advantage of taking it topically is that the mechanism for recycling the glutathione is actually built into your cells. So if you can disperse it over a large surface area, right, you take kind of access of this pathway that allows you to recycle glutathione. And by doing that, even though it's kind of on your skin and it does absorb into your body systemically, but you're kind of lowering the burden. The body is always in some kind of dynamic equilibrium, right? So even if you have toxicity stored in a certain area, right, there's kind of always this exchange, this diffusion that's happening. So if you could take advantage of that surface area, restore your glutathione there, it's going to kind of, equilibrate somewhat. And, it was kind of surprising is that, one of the side effects, reported in some people, but not all people, is that when they started taking this lotion, they actually started to get constipated. And that's a symptom that we see often when we start to work on the microbiome, particularly in individuals that might have some underlying constipation. If you start to take some things, you might see the constipation getting worse because those toxins affect motility in the muscles and the mitochondria in the gut. So that was actually a clue to us that it was actually working topically. So one of the blurbs on the side of the bottle is that you don't want to take this without making sure that you have some motility tools on board. And that was one of the impetuses for designing one of our supplements. Specifically, it helps with motility. It has a strain on there of Bifido animalis HN019. We paired some other components in there like flaxseed and ginger and magnesium. So motility can be the autism really kind of falls into two clads in my mind, is that you have the kids that go 7-8 times a day, or the kids that go once a week. And somewhere in between you kind of fit in there. So the ones that go very infrequently, that are constipated, those are the ones that you really have to be gentle with and make sure that motility is supported before you take too many things, because otherwise you have this brewing bucket of toxicity that's in you that you're trying to get out. But yeah.
With the glutathione ointment or lotion, would this possibly be applicable to other autoimmune diseases? And even because I think it benefits the mitochondria, do you see any help in like the longevity industry?
I think it potentially could be helpful, certainly outside of ASD. We have some evidence to show that. I think anybody that's dealing with some kind of dysfunction, it's worth a try. Recently there was an elderly woman that even before starting some of the suggestions, I had sent her this lotion, and she pulled up the email right now and said, I used the cream and returned to almost normal within 45 minutes after she was doing some kind of exhausting exercise. So we definitely have these anecdotal reports of people using it and having what would be kind of an inflammatory component going down. I don't want to go out there and say it's this miracle thing that's going to help everybody out. But it's certainly, in my perspective, worth a try. For my son, it was very integral in kind of jumping to a certain level. And, we're actually going to be doing a clinical trial with it, along with gut balancing. So we're working on the IRB right now. And we're talking with people like Brian Hooker. He's kind of involved with the study, and it's a lot of work. So I got so many things going on, but we're going to show that it works, and we're hopefully going to take that and then get some nice attention and make it's certainly available for people to try now. But we know that we understand a lot about it. There's things that we don't understand. So we want to bring people to collaborate with us. And, that's how you chip away at the problem.
Hmm. That one supplement therapy alone, I think is a whole podcast worthy. The more you talk, the more excited I get about that. Now, is it again? We got a lot to cover here, but and it works. It absorbs in the body and it works systemically. Could it also work anti-inflammatory, like localized, like on a sore knee or anything like that?
I think so. I think I think if you were to you have an area of inflammation, right? There's going to be kind of exhaustiveness of glutathione there, but also probably a um, you know a large amount of oxidized glutathione that you could then take advantage of and kind of convert and probably bring down the inflammation locally in that region. Um, the compound also helps to convert. One of the features seen classically in ASD is very high levels of serum B12, and it's been used almost in the Western world of medicine by pediatricians to tell the parents that you don't need a B12 supplement to help you out because it's very well known that some of these kids get these methylcobalamin injections, and they're very helpful. But if you look at their blood test, which measures the cyanocobalamin B12, it's very elevated. So you would say, well, this person doesn't need B12. The compound that's in this lotion actually helps to convert cyanocobalamin into a hydroxycobalamin, which is a more active version of B12. So we think that it's kind of hitting on multiple levels. One, it's helping to recycle glutathione. Two, there's probably this molecule, which is, it's found in your body, you get it from various sources. It's probably been utilized up because you're dealing with this toxic burden. And as a consequence of that, your B12 in your blood starts to rise because you don't have the ability to convert it into hydroxycobalamin. So by using it now, all of a sudden you have this more accessible version of B12 that's then able to participate in methylation and things like that. So, and that B12 elevation I've actually seen outside of autism in some chronically very sick patients, right? There's one right now that's, his B12 levels are off the chart. Doesn't even take any B12, cyanocobalamin. So like I said, there's things that we kind of understand that we've been able to pick apart. We want to bring people to the table to help us understand it because we think this is hitting on multiple levels.
I saw that your B vitamins in one of your supplements are all methylated, and it is what you've been talking about there. And I recently became aware of the difference and the need for the methylated version. So that's super helpful information. Well, as you work with a client, and I understand there have been hundreds of them so far, can you sort of just walk us through a summary of from start to helping them?
Yeah. So these days, I'm all about kind of efficiency, and what's in my mind is I'm trying to reach the most amount of people and, bring the most amount of benefit to the most amount of people. There's obviously a more perfect way to work with one person, but there's this kind of efficiency and payoff of kind of, time spent with that individual person versus time spent with multiple people, and then the broad benefit that you can bring. And I'm also hoping that some of these people that work with me, they start to learn, and then they go on their own journey and they figure it out and it makes sense for them. And then they find something that, maybe leads them to slightly better direction. So in order to do that, I have to be efficient. So I have people, they fill out a Google Forms, and on that Google Form survey, there's a bunch of questions that, I really want to identify is are you in the constipation realm, or are you in the I'm going too many times realm? Do you suffer from bloating, things like that, implicating potentially some kind of SIBO? And then some other symptoms that I've been able to kind of, pin with whether there's a fungal issue, are there symptoms of having maybe kind of a mole exposure? Are there things like teeth grinding that are persistent in there? And it kind of builds for me kind of a profile for them. And then they go and they do one of these 16S tests. I basically have everybody go through Biome site. I can also analyze the ombre test. And I had made this software kind of using my skills and my background to look at the raw data, the sequence data. And I also have my pipeline to look at the data that comes straight out of the sequencer too. I had done this initially because I was trying to approach things from an analytical component, and there's some utility to doing that. And I was trying to mold that or merge that with expert practitioner information that's out there, and then trying to take advantage of PubMed literature, but not all PubMed literature, ones that I kind of scrutinized and read the paper and felt that this was a study or a relationship that was valid. For instance, sometimes you'll read a study and it'll say, oh, Triphala increased this particular genus of microbe. But if you read the study, you'll find that it went from 0 to 0.01, 0.01. Basically is in the realm of error. So something significant to me is that if you take this compound and it doubled or increased by 30, 40, 50%. So I would literally read the paper, pull out the relationships, and I stored it into this kind of matrix. And then I had some inference of what worked clinically from kind of some expert practitioner information. I try to mold all these three worlds, look at the herbs, which ones are most feasible, right? Something like oregano oil, which might be really good at doing something. How are you going to get somebody to take that particular kit? It's kind of off the list. I basically analyze these samples using the software, and then I sit down and I look at the dysfunction, and I try to see is there indicative of a very high fungal component, which I can kind of infer by maybe deficits in Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium or elevations in Prevotella. We've made some connections there. Is it a more of an IBD type, IBS type profile? Is it one of these characteristic profiles where there's little to no Bifidobacterium? Are there elevations in things like Ruminococcus, or there's deficits of Faecalibacterium prausnitzii? So I build a 6-week program, and then there's a 4-week post program, which is a combination of herbs, prebiotics, and probiotics that are meant to kind of, it's almost like a kitchen sink approach, but it's targeted to the biome. And it's meant to kind of cause a shift. And I asked them to retest around the 5th or 6th week. They continue those suggestions for 4 weeks. They're kind of cut in half in that post suggestion period. And they fill out a survey. They say whether they feel improvement, and then we kind of rinse and repeat. For some people, it's one round that really brings them significant improvement, and most people it's probably 2 or 3 get them to some place of quasi stability where they can kind of take a few things. Some have much more difficult cases, right? And you kind of have to be on there for several rounds. Other people, they're just seeing slow improvement, so they just keep on going. But that's basically what I'm offering, what I'm advertising out there, and what people participate in.
Alex, I think some of our listeners could be thinking to themselves, well, this guy, he's helping hundreds of families and he started 2 companies. He must be making tons of money doing this, which is shocking to me that you help everybody for free. You do not charge them.
Yeah, I don't charge. There was a point where I was requesting people to donate to either a fund. Right now, there's an optional charity that people can donate. It's a special needs school here in Tucson. It's tax deductible 503, but it's completely optional. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, there's a trust factor. There's a lot of scams and things out there, and it's a very hard sell in this community. Even taking a probiotic for autism, it's like night and day. You'll get an individual that aligns with that, and it's like, oh, that makes sense. My child has tummy issues. But then you'll get another, kind of ideology that any intervention in autism is kind of seen as, you're doing something non-ideal. It's controversial. So I want it to stay away from that as much as possible. And the way to do that is taking money out of the equation. I'm also lucky that I kind of work a good job that I'm able to do this. But also a lot of the parents, they don't have the ability to pay for anything. I would say probably more than half of the individuals that come to me, they're single mothers, and they're trying to keep things together. Some are in very bad states. They're either in a very bad living condition, and so it's hard enough to get them to purchase the supplements. I mean, oftentimes we'll send them things for free, or we give them basically the component at cost in some situations. And I don't know, it just makes me feel awful that there's a kid out there that can be helped, and these things should be covered by insurance, and theoretically, but they're not. And it's funny, like if you think of live in Texas, they actually have a mandate in Texas for autism that dietary supplements or supplements are required to be supported by a healthcare policy. And it's funny because even though I live in Arizona, my health plan is actually in Texas. So I tried to navigate this at one point because my son takes supplements. It was such a hurdle. I must have talked to people on the phone for 3 days, and I ended up giving up because the level of proof and the level of fighting against you at every point that this is actually needed, even though there's a law on the books. That's kind of how we feel as parents, even just going to the doctor. So, these are the things that kind of drive me. I want to make this feasible, practical. I want people to join what we're doing. And, if you're making money off or profit off of somebody else that's sick, that it doesn't sit well with me. I have, it's bothersome. So, yeah.
Well, as many have said, our medical system is more about sick care than healthcare, unfortunately. Now, you mentioned that intervention is often controversial. Why would that be the case?
That some of the mentality is like I said, the word is very broad, autism. So some of the mentality is that somehow you're changing the nature of the child. You're stripping something away from them. We actually have just started this website. It's called autismisbiomedical.com. It's under construction, but it's basically going to show and pinpoint all of the literature showing that there are components of autism that are clearly medical, right? But it's taboo because the alternative view out there is that this is the way things were intended to be. Kind of just leave them alone. But when you take that on face value, it kind of doesn't make any sense, because if you had a child that had some kind of direct genetic malformation, if they came out with some kind of procedure to intervene with that, nobody kind of snarks at that. Or if you have something like cancer or multiple sclerosis, these communities are very kind of tied together. Let's try to figure out things to help people out. So that's where this is coming from. We're not trying to strip anything away from anybody or remove an identity. And I think that more and more there's been an identity that aligns with being autistic. And I would say maybe there's something else going on over there. Those people can typically talk, right? Those people can typically verbalize, so that they've often kind of dominated the conversation. But that's what, I recognize it's controversial. That's why we say, hey, moderate to severe people that are looking for help, come find us. We'll work with you. We'll put you in the right path. The buck doesn't stop with us, but if you can get some level of improvement, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40% improvement, those are life-changing skills. I had a parent call me from New York who actually didn't do an intervention, just started using some of the kind of introductory products. And he said, it's amazing. My son went to the bathroom for the first time in his life by himself. This child is like 7 years old. He's been diapers his whole life. And when you start to realize, that there's something going on that's affecting your ability to function, right? If I continuously put you in a state of inebriation, right? I'm kind of likening it to an alcoholism. how could I expect you to, learn your ABCs, or learn how to play with somebody else, or being able to take a pen and write your name, right? That's not a fair chance. So I think that certainly the literature has documented that there's all of these, almost pseudo acidemias associated, and medical components in autism, and there's ways there to improve them. Why not do that?
Everything you're saying is so important. I wish we had hours. My wife is an occupational therapist. She works in the school system, and she says right now her caseload is pretty much all 100% neurodiverse at some level, and a lot of that is autism. So we talk about these things, a fair amount, and not so much in the schools, but books she's read. She has encountered this whole identity thing, So I sort of get where you're coming from. So don't mess with us. That's exactly. And then in the Christian context, I'm actually a pastor. Some will say, well, God created me this way, which I don't argue with, except in one sense, but in another sense, let's alleviate the suffering that's there. So I really appreciate the challenge that you're up against, and I love, Alex, how your brain is always trying to problem solve, but your heart is always trying to help. That's a really wonderful combination. And talking about the ASD rates, we both know the statistics, and it seems like it gets worse all the time. They're just skyrocketing. In all of your research, do you have a sense of what the top reasons are for these increases?
Yeah. So that I like this question, and I like to kind of turn it around on its end. That's the way kind of I approach a lot of problems, is it's kind of from the reverse. It's actually something that you learn in physics, is like you kind of try to solve the problem. You assume a certain state or a certain solution, or you assume that it's not true. In this case, it's a kind of a weird thing to say. It's very odd, but if I were to induce autism, right? If I were to induce that state, so what would be the things I would bring on board to kind of that would combine to a high likelihood of that happening? Not definitively having one thing that kind of causes it, because I think it's multifactorial, and what's going on is toxicity, inflammation. The microbiome was obviously implicated, but certainly I think the increases of things like C-section, right? C-section has become more available. It has become somewhat more exotic, in the sense that it kind of alleviates you having to certain things associated with giving vaginal birth. There's certainly a necessity that's needed in certain situations why you would go that way. But I think the increased rates of C-section are certainly something, is that some level of contribution. And that contribution is basically the child is not getting the vaginal flora. They're not getting inoculated the same way that they would. They tend to kind of come out with a microbiome that's more initially akin to what's on the skin. Now, there's some tools that you can kind of adjust for that. They take sometimes the during birth, they'll take that, kind of vaginal discharge, and they'll kind of inoculate the baby so they can get some of those very important microbes that will colonize your gut. So I think that's one component. And literature has already showed that there's a correlation, at least, between those two things. The excessive use of antibiotics, if you have an ear infection, do you need to take an oral antibiotic? If you have an ear infection, do you need to take any antibiotics? Should you really wait 1 or 2 days before even kind of thinking about doing stuff? Are physicians prophylactically giving antibiotics when there's viral infections on board? In the case, we brought my son and my daughter to check up this winter, and neither of them were sick. They're just a physical exam, and the physician gave us 2 scripts for antibiotics, saying there's a lot of stuff going around. Take these just in case. Which, there's nothing that I can say at that point. It's not even worth the discussion or or any kind of argument. It doesn't surprise me. So I think that antibiotics are certainly overused, and that gives way to things like fungal overgrowths. They're certainly overused very early on. It was the case in my son. We didn't know any better. We're just parents. He had 5 courses of antibiotics before 17 months. There's other modes of toxicity that you can accrue, right? It's either you're introduced some kind of chemical exposure, something that was immune stimulating. It could be steroids or some, vaccines is a very controversial thing. It implicates the immune system. I honestly think that we're very naive that we understand how that's working at such a young age. And I think the recipe is that when you're mixing all of these things together, like in the case of my son, he was sick, he got antibiotics, he got steroids, he got vaccines in the same 1 week, 2-day period, and then he checked out. So like if you want a recipe for disaster, that's the way to do it. Play with the immune system, play with the microbiome, introduce chemical toxicities. It might be, your child is sleeping on a mattress that's, filled with some kind of, foam that has high levels of arsenic, off-gassing and things like that. We've become so modernized and efficient in making things, baby foods and clothes and towels and, products for the home, furniture, vinyl siding, vinyl flooring, that we don't know what this is doing. And when you add all of these insults together, they superimpose. There's a genetic component there that makes you bad at doing things, bad at detoxifying. And I think that that's basically what happens. If you do all of that at a very early time when the child is developing, that's your recipe for disaster. So I think it's very multifactorial. I think intervening with the gut is one of the biggest ways that you can kind of stave things, keep things from happening, and try to just be clean, be cognizant of what you're putting in your child, the foods you're putting in them, the exposures. It's even known that having a pet in the house could be very beneficial because of the microbes they bring into the home. We live in these concrete walls, that are kind of isolated from the soil, and we're kind of our own worst enemies in the pursuit of efficiency and life and all these things that we want to better ourselves. I think that has a toll, and that's kind of what we're seeing there.
That all absolutely makes sense. And of course, you've heard the controversy. Some would say, well, it's only vaccines are causing all the autism. But, I think what you're saying is vaccines can be one of the multiple factors. For example, Keith Bell from the Gut Club. I interviewed him about one of his papers. It was titled "Vaccine Injury: First the Gut, Then the Brain." And, his argument was a vaccine can take a dysbiotic gut or even a somewhat healthy gut and make it dysbiotic. And of course, we know the gut-brain axis, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't think even Keith would argue vaccines alone, but certainly some vaccines in combination with other things.
The one thing about the vaccines that I don't really see anybody touching on, which just befuddles me, is that, right, you go and you buy a car. It's very possible that you're going to get a lemon car, right? I mean, things get recalled. You've seen recalls on airbags. There's recalls on refrigerators. There's recalls on, child toys. These things come off an assembly line. And if you speak to the individuals that are very, involved in the manufacturing of vaccines, I mean, you can even find this, that Dr. Fauci has quoted this. Some of the biggest insults for vaccines are what grows in them that are not intended to grow in them. So for instance, they test for something like mycoplasma as this vaccine is kind of culturing and growing. And if they find it in that batch of 10,000 units, well, then they burn the batch. But they don't test every single one, right? It's like coming off of assembly line. There's always a confidence interval, right? If you test 5 out of 100, that batch is good. So the assumption is that what's coming off the assembly line is the same. You get the DDaP vaccine, I get the DDaP vaccine. How do you know that the one that I had didn't have something additionally in there not that it was nefariously put in there, but it was not intended to be in there because it's an inevitable, we recall milk, right? We buy groceries at the store. There's E. coli on them because something, so that's almost impossible to test for, right? That you can't, and it certainly could be a one-off, right? Where 1 out of 100 of these things happen. I think that further complicates it, but there have been known, occurrences where people get like mycoplasma from a vaccine or something like that, and they're adults, and it's a serious issue. It's not easy. And then you got to think about that same concept of the globalization and the manufacturing. They're trying to get the cost down, right? Because there's some profitability with this. So I'm going to take this $10 vaccine. I want to make it for 50 cents. Well, what do you think is going to happen with that, right? Because the intent is you want to help thousands of people across the world, right? But there's got to be an impact on quality. So the biggest complaint against that is that who's checking that, right? And if there's things like vaccine courts, but if there's no liability, right? And then they've been, basically Congress has given them kind of an easy way out. You can't sue them. Then it's like, GM giving you a faulty airbag and then they're never going to recall it.
That's a fascinating example that I have never heard of. I appreciate that. You talk about all the toxins, and I go back to your glutathione recycling lotion, that's absorbed through the skin. And then you think everything else we put on our skin or we wash our hair with or deodorants, I think most people don't think about that, those ingredients. Yeah.
We're in this world of super clean. I mean, think about it from the hospital standpoint, right? One of the biggest issues in the hospitals is C. diff infection. So why, right? There's a super clean environment. If you keep on hitting the microbes on that countertop with chemicals that are intended to kill it, what eventually over time you're just going to get microbes that are somewhat resistant to that tend to flourish, right? That's a component of it. The other was probably antibiotics too, but there's a balance there. And you'd say, well, what's the solution? Do you just go dirty? I think the solution is you try to want to use ingredients that nature gave you, to kind of do the cleaning that you might need to do. So anything has this exotic chemical in it that's not naturally found, I'm not saying not to use it, but you start to question yourself, right? If there's other alternative ways that you can do it that are more natural, maybe that's the way to do it. Maybe that's the way it was intended, right?
So vinegar instead of bleach and antibacterial stuff.
That's where I would kind of go. I'm
Mhm.
not one to, I never like to say no to anything exclusively, but I think that's the balance that we need to have. Stay away from the perfumes and the over sensitive, all of the odors and things. Those could be really big issues for mast cells and what they do for, hormones. So sometimes the solution is the problem.
Yeah, very helpful. I read you have so much on your blog and websites, really helpful information. And I read some of the testimonials reporting just some remarkably positive improvements in their children. And of course, parents are going to, of course, delight in that. Is there a typical amount of improvement that you see with the children you're helping?
It varies. I mean, but I like to, I tend to like not to say give anybody hopes, but I think so the surveys are all posted live. These are individuals that filled out an evaluation. There's about 200 or so in there. And I think about 30% of those reporting on one round reported about a 10 to 15% improvement, and something like 10% reported over 25% improvement, 10% reported 20 to 25% improvement. So certainly more than half, I think it's like 2/3 of them have seen more than 10 to 15% improvement, or larger in that. And that's obviously very anecdotal, right? That's the kind of feedback that you'll get when you go to speak to a researcher. I spoke to one, this is anecdotal, but it's coming from the parent, right? I mean, how else do you measure improvement? Sometimes when they do a research paper, they'll put in the headline, autistic symptoms reduced by 50%. What are you using to measure that? Some test that you invented? I think at the end of the day, if you're getting the word of the parent that says they want to do it again, they've seen improvement, that it's feasible. We ask all these questions. Is this cost effective? And it's ranked 1 through 5. These are all honest responses, and the high 95% of people want to keep on doing it. That says it in itself. So we're not making claims that this is going to solve all of your problems, but in some cases it goes from the child, is not tippy-toeing anymore. He's able to focus. He's able to use a pen. He's able to potty train. He's able to, sometimes there's words that come out. His language is elicited. He's playing with people. He's climbing. Motor coordination is better there. Interaction. Other behaviors that you would kind of associate as being more neurotypical. Like, one of the things that my son started to do when we started to intervene with him is he started to do some more kind of I wouldn't say malicious, but more kind of like boy appropriate things. Like, he'd be looking for, like, where we hid all of the treasures or cookies or something in the house, or he'd kind of do something in a boyish way and try to get away with it, and kind of laugh. And these are things that are not normally experienced, but for a parent with autism, it's like, oh, he never did this before, and look what he's doing right now. He's playing with this ball. He's playing with this game. He's going on his own accord to find this thing in the refrigerator by himself. He can put on his socks, put on his pants. So these are all kind of different things that usually come in a message to me in one way or another. And I when I have time, I screenshot them. I put them in this gains document, and they're up for people to read in the words of the parent or the individual that's writing them.
30% improvement feels like life-changing for parents. I have no doubt about that. And it's those little changes. My wife did a workshop on neurodiversity recently, and I think the number was something like 85% of neurodivergent adults are unemployed. And, it's the small things, right, that can prevent somebody, having a little bit better of a conversation, whatever it might be. But it sounds like you make these smaller changes at 30% level. Well, that's going to impact their entire life, not just their 3-year-old or 4-year-old self.
Yeah. So like, that's my kind of ideas, is that there's some exotic therapies out there. Some of them are effective. Some of them can induce a lot of change. Most of them are either unattainable or very expensive, or not feasible, because of the age or where you have to travel to get them. And they don't always, kind of work. So how can we bring improvement to a lot of people, change the quality of life, do it at an earlier age? And improvement breeds improvement. And, if it's 10, 15, 20%, that can make a huge difference. I mean, the one thing on parents' minds, I would always want to take the burden myself. But when you have a child, like, there's, you kind of fear what's going to happen when I'm not here, kind of a thing. So that's where you're coming from, is that you want to kind of put them in the best possible state. You want to make sure that they're happy, taken care of, and that the clock is ticking for these parents. That's the way they're thinking. So and rightfully so. So we're just trying to say that there's things that we know that work for a lot of people. Try them out. They're feasible, they're practical. Get what you can get. This isn't gospel. We don't have all the solutions, but what we find is that improvement breeds improvement. And going back to my field, like in oncology, and I know one of the questions that you had kind of for me was about FMT. There was a study in 2019 that looked at immunotherapy in cancer patients. Immunotherapy is a therapy it's kind of relatively new, but what it attempts to do is basically use your immune system to target the specific type of cancer that you have. It's really interesting. And the thing that's puzzling about it is that it either works really good or it doesn't work at all. And that kind of was like really puzzling to the practitioners. They took these individuals that had melanoma and they gave them immunotherapy, and the ones that didn't respond to it, they gave them FMT, and then they repeated the immunotherapy, and they all became responders.
Wow. Wow.
So if anything, the most powerful thing there is that if you can bring the gut health back, what does that do to the rest of the body? Maybe the therapy that you're trying that isn't working is going to start to work. And there's a lot of therapies out there. I mean, like the gut isn't the only thing, but maybe if you start there, you'll be able to unravel the mystery and get back to a better place.
Yeah, that's just mind blowing. I love the fact that your testimonials are so transparent. You're not cherry picking, 2 out of 300 or something. They're all out there. So you're giving also a realistic goal for improving symptoms, and which I think is very humble on your part, but also it gives a lot of hope for families. But you are certainly aware way more than I would be of all the scams in this arena. I imagine parents are really desperate for help, and they'll probably throw money, at least initially, at almost anything. Do you sort of feel like you're not only helping parents, but also in one sense indirectly fighting against those scammers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough environment. I can see easily for a parent to get discouraged because they've spent so much money on different things. It's hard to know who to trust out there. Sometimes it's not even about trust. Sometimes it's just that that thing didn't work for their kid, and or maybe they weren't in the right setting, or they didn't have the right kind of initial conditions. So how do you navigate it? Like personally, I think if not to rule these people out, but the people that have skin in the game, usually they have some deeper meaning, behind what they're doing, and it's either that personally they had an insult, or they had a child that's an insult, or they know a family member that had an insult, and that's what they got into this in the first place. So, kind of knowing about their backstory, I think that helps somewhat. At least you kind of potentially rule them in. You know it's otherwise really difficult. I mean, certainly there are people that have worked with me, and things haven't gone the right way, and the way that I try to mentally kind of encompass that is that a lot of these parents, individuals, they're in some pretty bad places. Like, for you to be a single mom and you got to take on all the duties, and you're going to be in a bad spot, not wanting to trust anybody, and frustrated. So it's always sometimes very difficult to help everyone the way that you want to help them. And this is something that Dr. Christian Bogner and I talk about a lot. It's like, it's there's certainly a lot of people that say very nice things, but it's hard to help. You feel like there's people that you want to help, but you can't quite help them because there's certain impasses. And then there's some, we really feel strongly too about the research setting. There is a lot of organizations out there, and charitable not-for-profits that we feel that are really not using their platform or the monies that they raise wisely. They're either putting them into corners where there's therapies that are going to take 20 years to come. You try to meet with them and talk to them about what you have, and they don't really want to kind of give you the light of day. There's some people that think that the solution has to come from inside the box, not outside the box. So it's frustrating. I can't tell you the raw emotions that I have felt through the entirety of the process, from the diagnosis of my son to being on a practitioner side, the medical side, the research side, the people that have helped me out, the people that have told me that I have no business doing what I'm doing, that I should just worry about my own child. Some prominent people that I really looked up to. So it's a very odd space. The only way that I navigate that is by trying to find like-minded people. So I work very well with Dr. Christian Bogner. He also has a child, same kind of situation. He's open to finding solutions. He's day and night. We're looking into new things. We want to be a beacon for trying to figure out that stuff. And navigate the scams. But certainly I don't tell people to not do things. I just say do your research, right?
Mm-hmm.
Try to do your due diligence. Ask other parents what they think, what they've done, outside of this realm. If it's something like a stem cells or some other kind of therapy, do your homework. And there's more than one way to heal, but it's very challenging.
You would like to think the medical research industry would learn from their mistakes. It reminds me of a classically bad example would be Alzheimer's research, and I forget, it's 30 something years, hundreds of billions spent pursuing the plaques
The
in the
plaques,
brain.
yeah.
And now they're saying, whoops, we lost $100 billion. Sorry, everybody. And I'm sure you're describing similar trajectories in ASD. That's really frustrating. Yeah. Well, ignore the haters, Alex. Keep doing what you're doing, man. You mentioned the palatability of some of your supplements, and ASD parents know there are always challenges with diet and the children, trying to get them to eat the right foods, et cetera. So I'm guessing prospective clients would be glad to know that you really don't put a top emphasis on diet. Why is that the case?
Yeah, it's a question that I get a lot. Is I'll get in an email, what do we do about diet? And it's not that I don't care about diet, and I don't think that it's important. But in terms of kind of the order of operations and the kind of bang for the buck, the last thing that I want to see happen is, these are typically picky eaters to begin with. They start to exclude things, and they become more picky. I think the general framework that I have for the diet is try to reduce the processed junk as much as possible. Anything that has kind of the added artificial sugars, that the supermarket has really thrown at us. Take those things out. Take out the foods that to be inflammatory, if they are things like breads, or there's certain dairy components. If you know them to be inflammatory, at least take them out for a short period of time until we can get to a point where they're not. In terms of what to eat, try to eat a broad array of different things. Try not to eat the same thing every day. Don't discount fruits. I know a lot of parents will say, "Oh, well, there's a lot of sugar in fruit." There's other benefits to having fruit. I would say the best way to approach that is not to binge, right? There's no issue with having blueberries and oranges, but if that's all you ate all day, right, that's not ideal. So I would say include everything that grows naturally. Don't binge. Try to eat broadly. If it becomes too overwhelming, I would say don't worry about focusing on it now. I think we can get the most benefit and gains out of doing this microbiome intervention, and I think that you'll find that maybe the palate will open over time. And the tips and tricks that I usually give parents is that try to take advantage of like a shake. If you can get them to take a shake, you can mix in some vegetables, you can make it palatable. You can usually, if you add something like raspberries in there, it kind of offsets the flavor. If you can't do dairy, they have coconut alternatives. But the shake, there's usually some tricks that you can do in there to get them to take things that they otherwise wouldn't, add into their diet. And then, go low and slow. You're not going to turn this around in a day. And, that's the way that the body heals too. And there's some practitioners have the approach is like, okay, you got these 10 things. These are the solutions. Let's take them all at once. Sometimes it hits the bee's nest too much. You got to, it's like kind of moving out of the house. You don't move everything out at once, right? You can't move the couch and the TV out of the same door. You have to do it methodically, one step by step. You take a break in between, you rehydrate. That's the way that the best way to heal. Shifting the biome is very taxing. It releases a lot of metabolites. Those metabolites gets absorbed. The body has to detoxify that. It uses a lot of vitamins and minerals to do that. So you start to get depleted. So you need to if you keep on doing it too much, now energy is being put into fighting inflammation. The immune system goes down. So there's always an impedance matching that you need to do. Right, kind of you have your finger on the beat, too far, too much, pull back. That's the best way I think to approach the healing. Um, yeah,
That's a very holistic approach. I appreciate that. And I love the idea of, parents do this, right? Sneak in the less exciting, palatable food into a smoothie or something. Let the record show. I like spinach in my smoothie, but my wife puts avocados in smoothies. And even though I like avocados, I do not like them in smoothies. So
yeah.
uh, draw a line there, but that's super helpful. On your blog, you state that consumers should assume that probiotics will not colonize in the gut. And I know one of the ones that you like to use is a strain of Lactobacillus reuteri. But I've had some experience in family and even in my own gut. I've taken a strain of B. infantis EVC001, and I've seen it in a couple of family family members with some bad guts that completely turned around from very dysbiotic to very healthy. And I was actually able to seed this B. infantis in my own gut as well with a relatively few doses of it. So wondering, and just so listeners know, it's a bifidobacterium, and the bifido rises, and it can kill the bad guys, lowers your pH, and it's highly anti-inflammatory, which of course would be one of your goals. So wondering if that might be something in the arsenal to consider.
Yeah, I know. You mentioned to me this before we started here, and it's this strain from Avivo, and it's something that I had looked into in the past, but at that time I wasn't nearly kind of astute as what I am now. But certainly, I think that there are these very magical strains that can be helpful. The one that I like to use, the Lactobacillus reuteri, it's a BioGaia DSM 17938. And in the case of that, some of the clinical studies have shown that even with you'll see the dosing is like 100 million units, 100 mil CFU, but you can still cause an appreciable intervention, just a small amount of CFU. So I think the vast majority, unless you have some of these special strains, won't colonize. But that isn't to say that you can't see a benefit from taking it. I think in those cases, the dominant effect of what you're seeing is kind of the immune component of what's reacting to that probiotic, and then you're kind of almost harnessing the immune system to kind of dampen things down. And
Can you flesh that out a little bit, what you meant there?
so and this it kind of involves with a lot of different concepts, even the concept of probiotics and histamine, or even the concept of taking an antibiotic or an antifungal. The perception is that when you take, for instance, an antibiotic, that you're taking this antibiotic and it's going in and it's killing the thing that it wants to kill. But what's happening more realistically is that it's doing that at some level. What gets released and how the immune system responds to those antigens is the dominant effect that then takes over. So it's almost like it kind of wakes up your immune system, saying, oh, here's the debris of this thing that just got killed. And it goes after it, and it does it systemically in different areas of the body. And I think that is dominantly why so many people, particularly in the world of antifungals, that they take them and sometimes nothing happens. They're going through antifungals like crazy. It's because they don't have the backing of the immune system to kind of go after what gets released. So when you can build the gut back up, build the immune profile back up, you could take advantage of that mounted attack, almost like when we were talking about with cancer. So I think when you're taking a probiotic that doesn't colonize, and even, I was talking to someone recently, like, oh, well, can it survive the stomach acid? We have data that shows that even dead probiotics are effective. So it's almost like if you were kind of walking around society and there's these hidden threats that you can't see as a policeman, but someone were to, introduce something, some magic glitter, and all of a sudden now these threats become apparent. Well, now the policeman can go after them and find them. And I think that that is the dominant effect, that when you take something like an antibiotic or a probiotic or an antifungal, in the case of it not colonizing, that you see, it's really, you're assisting the immune system to kind of go after that and dampen that overgrowth down. So that's where I come off with that statement that, largely they don't colonize. I think that's the mode of action. But certainly there are these ones, like you mentioned, that these kind of super strains that they're just more effective at getting in there, becoming, joining the community, kind of helping you out in a certain way. So I'm really excited about what you shared with me, particularly with that for some of the younger, the kind of younger clients, that there aren't a lot of tools, right? It's infeasible to give a 12-month-old something like olive leaf, right? I mean, how are you going to do that? But this probiotic that's very effective, that can join the community and shape things, that's certainly very attractive there. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for the discussion. If our listeners want to know more about EVC-001, a couple months ago, I did a podcast with somebody from Avivo. I've done a couple videos actually about it, and I'll post that on the show notes. In addition, of course, to all the links where they can find you as well, Alex. I see you are a practitioner with BiomeSite. You primarily use BiomeSite as a testing company. And I saw that the number of your ratings is more than 3 times higher than the second highest practitioner. So you are by far the #1 practitioner on BiomeSite, which I think is just more evidence of your success. To talk about your relationship with BiomeSite.
So yeah, they've been great. Rose Wellbrug is the CEO, and she's a great individual. I had started reaching out to her probably 2 or 3 years ago, when I was starting to get into some of the components of the software I was designing, because one of the advantages that BiomeSite had is that they were providing this test internationally. And there's a lot of people that seek me from other countries. I mean, there's people, Italy, China, India, Russia. I mean,
Wow.
the thing is, it's an epidemic everywhere. And how do you turn away, some parent in another country that's pleading to work with them? So when I initially started doing my analysis, I was using Ombre testing, which is similar. It's basically the same test, similar type of. At one time, they were using the same exact lab, Ombre and BiomeSite, but Ombre stopped doing the international support, and they stopped giving us the coupon for the ASD kids. So I had been in talks with Rose, because their reports were a little bit formatted differently, and I needed them to add some taxon information there. So they were very receptive to doing that. And they, at some point I became a practitioner, but I never published by profile, because I wasn't really looking for business per se. And she had mentioned to me, she says, "Oh, well, you have a lot of reviews on there." So I can't even see them. So I went and I published it, and we saw all these positive reviews. I said, "Wow, this is really cool. There's a feedback that I had never seen before." But they've been really great. Anything that I've asked, we've had some nice discussions about some of the components of their pipeline, some of the different microbes that pop up. And they had asked me to write this blog a couple of months ago, which has been a real hit for me, because I've had so many more people coming my way, trying to collaborate or being interested to work with them. So it's a really cool company. I've only been on the practitioner portal for about a year. It's a mechanism. People can post their reviews if if there's something that they don't like, they can post something negative. I'm trying to be transparent and trying to not take things over, but I'm certainly want to emphasize the component of this that I think can work. So they've been really helpful with that.
Yeah, another great partnership, collaboration, as you're saying. Let's remind me, let's make sure we get that blog post in the show notes. That sounds helpful. We're talking about reducing symptoms of children with ASD. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could prevent ASD? Are you aware of research that might help prevent ASD?
Yeah, so I think, one of the strain that you alluded to in this Vivo product, I think that that is certainly a tool. I think intervening young is the best place to do it. It's also the most difficult place because you have competing factors, right? Um, the biome of an infant there's some things that we know about it, but not as well as kind of the adult. Because they're not eating solid foods, or they're starting to introduce solid foods at that kind of interface, that also introduces a little bit of uncertainty of what it should like. We know there should be a high bifido population there, and we know that that's very integral. The symptoms and the diagnosis around that time can be somewhat confusing, and it can go in different directions for the parents. So they might not know what's going on until later on, where it starts to make sense. The development is very dynamic. So it's hard to kind of parse out, when you should introduce these tools. I think in some cases it's very apparent because the symptoms are very strong. But something like these infant specified probiotics, like you mentioned, another one that I use is this BioGaia strain, that is very helpful, and it's also appropriate, for that age. There are even versions of other probiotics, like Florister makes one. It's a Saccharomyces boulardii for infants. That might help combat some fungal issues. And then, you know, making sure that you kind of support motility. There are some tools on there for that, kind of looking at the bowel, the stool quality. I think that those are also integral. It's hard because there's not a lot of things that you can intervene. There's some prebiotics that are probably appropriate. I think the GOS and the HMO can be helpful around that age. There's some actually infant formulas that I've seen as I was going through the aisles in the supermarket that now have HMO in it. So I think that it's becoming understood that this is something that can be used to either, not even for ASD, fight off things like allergies and lifetime issues there.
Allergies, asthma. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it for me it's difficult because for the people that work with me, I tend to have like this 3-year-old cutoff because of all of those issues. Because it's just a very, very difficult type of patient to really make sure everything can go in one way or the other, and it takes a lot of resources, and because of the diagnosis and all that stuff. But it's something that I think can be improved, and I've been thinking about it long and hard of how's the best ways to do that, but it's certainly going to take time, I think.
Well, and even if you don't directly work with, like, 0 to 12-month infants, I think what we're saying is improve the infant microbiome as early as possible.
Yeah, breastfeeding is integral. Try to stay away from, they don't want to tell people to not take antibiotics, but certainly if it's something like an ear infection and you want to go down the antibiotic route, ask the physician if drops or something that are amenable first, at least that you're not going to be deviating the entire microbiome of the gut there. And try to mitigate the exposure to insults, if you possibly can. There's a balance between being exposed to other kids and animals and stuff like that with what it does to the immune system, rather than not taking the baby out at all and not exposing them to that. So it's tricky, and I would say the microbiome is certainly a key component. If you can do the baby foods at home, and try to bake them yourself, maybe it's another option, rather than this thing that's been sitting in this plastic jug potentially that has all of these phthalates in there. What that's doing to the child. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the curve will start to come down on those rates. I've seen some research on FMT, or fecal microbial transplant, in autism, and I first ran across FMT 12 years ago or so, and that was my first introduction to anything related to gut and gut health, and some fascinating results in the literature. Wondering if you would ever recommend that.
So yeah, that's something that we had done for my son, and that was really the impetus for me kind of shifting towards going into this whole gut balancing thing and approach, because I don't doubt that people are going to do it and see potentially a benefit. But I think that the long-term solution is that it kind of fades away. Maybe not in everybody, but I think for a large, kind of set of individuals, is that what's really needed is either a continual therapy, or a superposition from prebiotics, diet, probiotics, herbs. So I think that's a component of it. I think the other component of it is that there are some individuals that are very reactive, that maybe they have an underlying large fungal issue or mold issue, and you jolt them with this huge inoculation of immunity, essentially, and then the immune system starts going nuts. And I've seen in many individuals that certain symptoms got worse because of it kind of inflamed this nerve, and it perpetuated for a very, very long time. So when you combine all those things, the unknown component of putting trillions of microbes in you, and I don't know that it's as simple as, hey, this is a good donor, because it's like mixing two different soups that taste good, right? If you like tomato bisque soup, and if you like French onion soup, if you mix them, is it going to taste good? There's so many interactions
No.
that we don't understand, that's the thing for me, that's my hesitation. It's the feasibility, the practicality, the expense, the perpetuality of eating it, the unknown. And then I say, okay, well, this is stuff that I do understand somewhat better. It's more feasible, and we can get there maybe slower. But I'm extremely excited about the implications of it. Obviously, I have all the papers, and it's like the hairs on your arm stand up when you read the paper about the patient that had multiple sclerosis, that is wheelchair bound, and got an FMT transplant, not for their MS, but because they had C. diff, and all of a sudden 3 weeks later they started walking. It's an amazing story, and I think that what it says is that, hey, the gut health is implicated in all these things. I think in the future it's going to become more feasible and practical, and we're going to understand it better. And there's probably going to be some hybrid of that with maybe a prebiotic soup or something that we understand and we can deliver. But for right now, it's one of those things that I mean, for me, I can't do anything with it. I can't,
Right.
and I've certainly seen, both the good and the bad of it come my way. So, I think we're probably a decade or two away from being able to clinically use it feasibly. But it's a certainly powerful tool, and it's very good for attracting the other disciplines to say, hey, there's something going on here, because it's a strong dose and it's quick.
Yeah, helpful answer. I do appreciate the fact that you're sort of implying this, that the research community seems to really have accepted FMTs. I mean, they've been around for 40, 50 some years or whatever. So that is a good, it portends well for future, I think. Yeah, very helpful. I appreciate the fact that you recommend 16S gut tests. They are definitely at this stage more cheaper, will continue probably to be more cheaper, and give what you're saying, I think, is a sufficient result to help your patients. A couple of podcasts ago, I interviewed CEO and founder of Tiny Health, which, as you know, uses a more detailed but more expensive shotgun testing method. But I'll also appreciate the fact Tiny Health recommends infants get tested, and we're talking about that preventative care, every 3 months after birth. And I can also see the benefit because Tiny Health's going to pick up on that B. infantis strain that we talked about, where 16S is not going to be able to see it. But I imagine we already talked about this a little bit, but you see the benefit of early and consistent testing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think 16S right now, the kind of that I like to use different analogies. It's 16S for me is like, everyone has a cell phone and they're used to like 3G versus 4G versus 5G, right? 5G being, it's faster because the frequency there allows for more kind of bandwidth. But there's parts of the country that you can visit that won't have 5G, right? If you go into the Midwest, they're not going to have 5G. So if your cell phone only worked with 5G, then you'd be SOL, right? You wouldn't be able to call anybody, right? But if it was dynamic, if it was able to kind of cross all of those bands, that would give you the best of both worlds. So that's kind of my envisionment, what the kind of the ideal stool test is because there's certain things that are intrinsic to 16S. It really is considered kind of a Goldilocks zone for different regions. One of the reasons is that the length of what you're sequencing is relatively small in the V3, V4 region. With shotgun, you're sequencing the entirety of the DNA and all of the other microbes in there. So because of that, the computational problem is much more difficult. It's like akin to asking you to count to 200 versus asking you to count to 150 million. And to do it successively and not mess up. So there's some inevitable errors that come along with the shotgun there. The other thing that's nice about 16S, besides what you're saying, it's cheaper, it's it's quicker. The libraries out there that exist are much more complete. Whereas for and for you to identify a bacteria, you have to capture it, grow it, and sequence it. And that sequence looks completely different on 16S than it does on whole genome. So you can imagine 16S started out so much earlier. That library is very well understood. Doesn't give you the specificity that whole genome sequence does. Whole genome sequence will give you down to the strain. But then I argue that do you really, I mean, in the cases where you want to know if this one happy strain is in there, that's very helpful. But in the case of intervening, kind of beyond that with herbs and prebiotics and probiotics, at least the prebiotics and the herbs, we don't know that olive leaf targets, this particular strain any better than another strain. We don't know the specificity there. It probably isn't. So the intervention to me, even if I knew what it was down to the strain level, is probably almost going to be the same there. I'm limited by that intervention. The other issues is that because the database isn't as complete, you sometimes get half of the profile somewhat missing, that they kind of leave it out because they weren't able to map it. Whereas in the 16S, like because the sequence is so much shorter and it has a lot of similarity in the hierarchy, even if I don't know that it's a Bacteroides species, a specific species, I can still determine that it's a Bacteroides genus, even if it's not in my database, because I know what all Bacteroides genuses look like across all the species, because there's a shared difference, but there's also a subtle difference that kind of, when possible, will tell you the species. But when you're doing whole genome, it's so different. So you could have two Bacteroides and their sequences are so vastly different. If one's not in your catalog, you have no idea what the other thing is. So you have to leave it out. So my kind of mantra is, I would rather know, kind of like, here's the building and, I'm walking up to it on fire. I have a big picture and I can see what's going on from the outside, rather than this very, very detailed picture of this particular one room. Because I think that to intervene in the problem, you need that broader, bigger picture of information. But I do respect the utility and the information that you get from that specificity. So I think, and I actually had discussions with Rose about this, is that the best test is having both of these together, where you can leverage off of all of the research is practically done based on 16S testing. The ranges are slightly different, but if you could pair these two together, wow, what a powerful combination that would be, because you can kind of really kind of check each other out. Leverage one where you have accuracy and the other one where you have kind of more precision. So that's kind of my feel, where it is right now. And certainly, if it wasn't working, I wouldn't have people saying that, they're seeing improvement. So there's definitely going to be a point where I think we jump to shotgun, or we pick it up and pair it with 16S. But for me right now, I'm just kind of do as much as I can with what the tools that I have. So I don't think that there's too many tests out there that give you the raw data for the shotgun. I think Thorn does. I'd have to look into Tiny Health to see if they do. But that's something certainly that's attractive to me and to several other practitioners.
Bioinformatics databases are like a black box to me. And if it weren't for your helpful analogies, I'd be lost in there. But I actually follow that, I think, for the most part. One of the things I do appreciate about Tiny Health, though, is because they're emphasizing especially the infant gut. And if they continue to grow as rapidly as they have been, they're amassing this wonderful database,
Yeah.
And I remember talking to Rose a while back, and it also found her to be extremely helpful and kind. That was one of their struggles, was even identifying, because parents or whoever would misidentify whether it's an infant or not, and the dates, and there's some frustration, at least earlier on. I don't know if that's still the case. But they want to do the same thing as well. It's just more data, right? Data is always king.
Yeah.
No doubt, no doubt. On one of your companies is called Researched Elements, and on your flow chart, it seemed to, as far as helping patients, it seemed to frequently fall to one of your products called Spectrum Max Powder. And I see it's filled with, as you sort of implied before, dozens of ingredients. Many of those are anti-inflammatory ingredients. And I was looking at a list. I'm like, I take a lot of those things, so that's good. But I'm surprised it doesn't contain any prebiotics, as some of your other products do. So just wondering how you came to choose the products that go into the Spectrum Max.
Yeah, so what goes along with kind of how things evolved typically is, how do you support this person through this microbiome intervention? And usually there's having kind of a broad multivitamin is key. There would be some components that had a positive either antioxidant potential or anti-inflammatory potential, or certain amino acids that we know that seem to be utilized more. So these were things that were being kind of recommended kind of regularly. And then there's some other modes of dysfunction that typically arise, like usually someone has a burden of histamine potentially, or they have increased need to kind of detoxify ammonia because their ammonia burden was high, or their liver function, liver is kind of taxed by all of the LPS and things on board, or they might have something like oxalates because there's a fungal component. So there's kind of all of these dysfunctions, and we usually had several different supplements to kind of tackle each one of them. We were trying to really get them down to make it more simpler. Spectrum Max was an attempt to kind of solve the best vitamin component possible that would be pushing on all of the wheels of metabolism so that nothing was missed, and do it in a palatable way, but also, bring on some, some cases there's a mushroom there or something to support the liver, like, there's in terms of amino acid function, or just through like a amino acid, like I think we have alpha ketogluteric acid in there, something to help with ammonia as well. So that was really the goal there. Whereas the prebiotics, we were leaving that to, some of our other supplements, like we have something called Gut Guardian and Prebiotic Repair. And in the case of Spectrum Max, you can take this without even needing to look at the microbiome intervention. It's just kind of a broad kind of vitamin support to help you out. And we felt that that would be useful because usually the parents are emailing us, they're waiting for the test results for 2-3 weeks, and they want to start doing something quickly. So we say, hey, you can start to take this, really kind of push the cycles, make sure everything is kind of functioning well, and then that'll prep you for taking some of the other components. We have two other supplements. One is Gut Guardian, one is Prebiotic Repair. Gut Guardian is meant to be a broad kind of, the analogy is like it's the beef stock for the soup. It sets kind of the tone, and you can add some things on top of that. You can use it to kind of stave off some things or keep
Now,
your
is this your French onion soup you're talking about?
yeah,
Okay. All right. Sorry,
so
interrupt your thought.
some of the most challenging pieces in designing them is kind of how to put things together, because it's hard to put everybody in one bucket, right? So you kind of have to have like different buckets that you want to be able to use together for some people, but not for everybody. So and we had to think about doses and overage and what's in this and what's that. And this was kind of our best attempt at pairing. Okay, well, some people are only going to take this, and some people can get away with taking these two things, or some people might need all three. And certainly it's difficult problem to solve, but so far it seems pretty good. We got some good responses, and we're always looking to improve things. We got some feedback, and we've made some tiny revisions here and there, and we want to do that. We don't want to make a supplement just to sell a supplement. We want to make a supplement to solve a problem. Right. If there's a better supplement out there that's doing that, most of the supplements that I recommend actually aren't even research element supplements. I mean, a lot of them are other brands because there's no need to make them. They already make them. They do it well. We don't have, for instance, the Bacillus coagulans. I use that heavily for people that have deficits in Faecalibacter prausnitza. We use thorn Bacillus coagulans, a very well-studied strain in there. So, I mean, that's what we're trying to just solve problems, make it more feasible. And yeah.
Well, you clearly do not have just a hammer in your toolbox, which I really appreciate. Alex, we've covered a ton of information here. This has absolutely been fascinating. Is there anything else you'd want to add? Anything we missed? Another supplement, another perspective on something you'd want to share? Summary statement.
I would just kind of end on, the whole process for me has been certainly kind of life-changing, put me on a certain path that I don't think I would have ever have envisioned getting into this. I had no real desire to kind of look at this stuff, based on my earlier life experiences, but certain things kind of motivate you. For me, it was my son, and I'm very thankful that I've kind of been on this journey, and also thankful for my family, my wife and my daughter have been very helpful and supportive of this. They understand the need, the changes that we've seen in my son, but also the changes a lot of other people have seen. And what I would just emphasize out there for anybody that's struggling with a health issue is that just try to bring some level of balance, back into your life. And I think that can bring you healing on multiple levels. And it isn't necessarily always the diet. It could be, the time you spend with your family, or the time you spend outside, right? This time you spend away from the cell phone or the TV, just kind of doing something a little bit different, and not binging on one particular thing. Sometimes the way out of the hole is to just kind of jump in a different direction. So I think if you have that kind of balanced, you try to apply that to different areas of your life, that might give you a certain amount of healing that you can leverage and then use to get some more healing. I've been able to kind of, basically kind of reprint that balancing mentality in different areas. And I've realized how helpful has it been. Just try to restore balance, talking to somebody, having a conversation, doing something a little bit more different that you weren't doing before. It brings you perspective, it brings you ideas, and it puts you on a path that I think is more normalized and is conducive to being healed and also being happy.
As you said before, implied success breeds success. That's true in all of life, and certainly in this case. I think, note to self, I might go buy your glutathione lotion. That one's really got me interested for some anti-inflammatory things. Alex, I cannot thank you enough. You're so busy helping people. I think this has been an important conversation. So thank you so much for the time that you've given us.
Thanks, Rich. It's probably some of the best questions I've ever been asked. So I really appreciate the time. Thanks again. Hope to talk soon.
Yeah, as I said before, ignore the haters. You're doing fantastic work. So I wish you the best, Alex. All right, take
Thanks,
care.
Rich. Take
Yeah,
care.
bye.